Okay, so today is August 22, and it's about sensor play. We move forward to the next slide, and then we talk about the sensor system first. So we have two distinctive categories of sensor system that you need to know first. We have central nervous system, and we have peripheral nervous system. So the nervous system that we have, some of them are peripheral, meaning that kind of the blood system, capillary blood system, that they are all over our body, that helps us feel the thing, help us touch or feel the heat, temperature, pain, and being vigilant about the surrounding environment in general. But that PNS or peripheral nervous system doesn't have any thought, doesn't have mind. It is mindless. It is automatic. It is reflexive. It is something that you just feel something, but you don't understand what is that feeling about. It is about movement or sensing, taking some stimuli, or sending something, doing some motor, but all of them are unconscious. But the CNS, the central nervous system, as if there is a kind of compact version of the neural system that has some memory inside, okay, that can think and might learn, and that can interpret or process or mix and match. So it's a much more active system, which is called central nervous system. Central nervous system versus peripheral ones. So you have this graph that the central system, as you see the person on the left, is the brain and the spinal cord, but peripheral is the other one. If you reduce or just remove the cerebral and spinal part, you will have the rest of the sensory system that is about peripheral one. So it is very important to get to know the difference between them. For example, when you are frightened or scared, or there's a palpitation in your heart, or when you have run so fast, or when you are sweating, all of them are peripheral nervous system, sympathetic or parasympathetic system. Yes? But what is central nervous system now? We move forward. Central nervous system, the brain, cerebrum, or cerebellum, or brainstem, and spinal cord, and more specific, are consisted of lots of different areas of the brain, like parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, cerebellum in different midbrain, pons, frontal lobe. And they are very important that you know that many years ago, the main idea was localization, that each part of the brain is responsible for a specific function. But after a while, scientists or neuroscientists reached out to this conclusion that there is not a kind of accurately distinct place in the brain solely responsible for certain function, but the pathway of interaction between the sensory, between the brain part of this, between the brain parts are involving and contributing to each other to work. So, in general, when you see the brain, yes, this area is more specialized in speech, this area is more specialized in processing the smell, hearing, auditory system, but the brain together, along with spinal cord, are responsible for processing, filtering, modulating, registering, and integrating sensory stimuli to give the meaning to it. And it is a very important thing to give the meaning to it. Okay, so just imagine that a child pick up a hot cup of coffee. You have said, no, 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 don't touch it. But the child touches it as a way of curiosity or as a way of independence seeking or autonomy seeking, whatever. He touches it because he doesn't mix and match your order with the exact motor reflex he is seduced to attempt to touch the cup. He touches the cup and he feels a very disgusting pain. He feels he needs to immediately avoid that pain. So he releases the cup of coffee, and then he screams and yells because of that painful experience that his touch communicated to the brain as a way of red flag say, pain, 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 pain. So this is a kind of general experience that a child understands, but it is not still translated into the word pain. It is just a kind of feeling that any living organism learns how to withdraw from, how to avoid from. Okay, so we have two different stimulus in front around us. Some of the stimulus are attracting and encouraging us to get closer to them because there is a kind of reward in it. And some stimuli are the ones that are defending us back or standing us back, or we feel that there's a feeling of insecurity. I don't like to be exposed again with that touch. I don't like to feel exposed with that. So once the mom says, no, 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 and once the child touches the cup of coffee and he feels it is hot, the mom says, it was hot, it is hot. Then the word hot gets registered in the brain of the child and gets associated with that feeling in the painful feeling on the hand. There are two different sensory memories. The word hot as a concept. The sound of mom who is saying no, 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 no beforehand. And upon touching the coffee cup, that hot, that hot coffee cup made an experience that the child wants to avoid. So they together make a concept of hot is pain. Hot is painful. I should avoid hot. I should avoid if my mom yells no, 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 no. And there are different modalities of experience. Any child might decide to take a lead or might decide to take a pattern out of that. Yes. So in general, central nervous system is responsibly learning from the past experience of sensory stimuli. What we gather forms our world. We behave, we move, we think, and we continue gathering the next stimuli based on the first stimuli, based on the first experiences. So any living organism has a tendency to live longer and to live securely and stay in comfort zone and receive more reward and avoid as much as possible those disgusting or disturbing or annoying stimuli. Yeah? So when it comes to the term of sensory pyramid here, It's a very, very common slide that I had to use it in several workshops so far I have ever had. But right now that we have talked a little about central nervous system, now it is a term to briefly mention that the central nervous system, the brain, cerebellum, the spinal cord, and also brain stem, midbrain, pons, all lobes of the brain together are standing or sitting at the bottom of this pyramid. It is some anatomical structure that receives and modulate and regulate those sensory systems. But what are those sensory systems and where are they coming from? They are coming from the receptors of each sensory system. For example, the receptors of visual system, okay, are in retina here. Yeah, so this is for hearing, it is words of corti for hearing. Yes, olfactory system or smelling, tasting, touch. For example, the receptors of touch are skin and the hairs on the skin are responsible for touch. Yes? So the other receptors, but the receptors per se don't have any mind, don't have the brain. They just are responsible to take that stimulus and communicate it to central nervous system. Then the central nervous system is responsible to learn from that, to get closer to that, to avoid it, to mix and match the concept with something else, to have a new interpretation about that, to make play out of that, to make some fun activity with that, to gain control over the environment through understanding them, or other things like that, okay? So, as you see here, we have 7 important systems here, okay? Vestibular system, tactile and proprioception are the most important ones that are playing big and important roles in modulating and controlling the gait of other sensory systems. What you touch, and also the position of and the space of the position of your head in the space, the balance and coordination of the movement, and also what you feel in your muscle and joint are important and give the total feeling of where you are at, what is your position, are you safe, are you secured, and where your territory is. They are about the first 3 sensory systems. They are most important because they are called close sensory system, near sensory system. In fact, they are as close as the body, tactile, vestibular and balance, and joint and muscles are inside our body. There is the gap between the receptors and the stimuli is very, very limited. You touch something, so there is no gap between your skin as a receptor and that sensory stimuli, either it's the kind of painful stimulus or temperature or anything, any tickling, anything, okay? But on another layer, we have some further sensory system, which are related to visual system and auditory. And 2 other systems that are not very important in human being, like kind of olfactory system and gustatory or taste system. That these 4 systems are responsible in appraising the environment from far Yes, you can see and hear from far. The gap and distance between the sensory stimulus and your receptor would be 50 meters, and you still can see. You still can hear and overhear. Yeah? Or you can still smell from outside. So it's connecting you to the world. But the first two systems is connecting you to yourself. So most of the time, tactile, vestibular, and proprioceptive system beside interoceptive system that is mostly related to peripheral nervous system, okay? They are all together responsible to give us a feeling about some intrapersonal awareness. But the ones at the top layer are about getting to know the world, okay? When we go far, when we go upward toward the top of the pyramid, we will see other skills or things that later on we can spend talking about, but not in this workshop. In this workshop, I'm going to say that on one hand, when we say a word of sensory play, on one hand, we have to talk about sensory system and what we are talking about. So just make sure, CNS, not PNS, brain and spinal cord, and this system, and the receptors. We have talked about sensory system so far, but now we can talk about that in everyday life experience, we are surrounded by sensory stimuli. Many different ways of experiencing sensory stimulation exist. If you are walking in sidewalk and all of a sudden you overhear sound of a kind of ambulance which is approaching to you, so the sound is too loud and you pay attention to this, yeah? But even when you are walking on the sidewalk, that proprioceptive system is giving some feedback or feedforward to your body system. And when you are walking, the breeze that you can feel on your skin or your face skin is another sensory stimulation. Or when you are sweating because of the hot weather, it's another sensory stimulation. You felt hot. So you might go to a music session, or a child might play with a rattling toy, or your mom is doing hair blower, or you go to a park to jump on trampoline, or any extracurricular activities like going to Wonderland. They are all different places and occasions receiving sensory stimulation. Now you understand how disabling it is if a child suffers from weakened sensory profile. If the child has a different or atypical sensory profile, many of the environments or places, the parks, beach, educational setting, classroom, many places that the child is about to go are not well fit with the sensory needs of the child. And I know many of the children who are very concerned about the hand blower in washroom, and they don't like to go to washroom since they are afraid of the sound of hand blowing. I know many of the children that get fully engaged with washing the washing machine that's spinning. And then I know that there are lots of concern for the families that they are complaining that my child cannot stop looking at the spinning wheel of a car in the street, and sometimes he might jump into the street to get closer to the wheel of the car, and it's dangerous. I know many of children might struggle with walking on the beach because they don't like the light touch of the sand on their feet. So it's a kind of avoidance from that thought. So a very, very lovely and pleasurable, pleasing experience for some child might be very, very disgusting or um, bad experience for a different child with different or atypicality in sensory system. Yeah. So on the other hand, we have spoken previously about the characteristics of play. Characteristics of play is that in play, we are considering an activity as a play only if it is voluntarily played, only if it is imaginary, only if it is filled up with pleasure or joy, only if the child is somehow active and doing something. Even thinking or observing something is doing that thing, okay? But the child is not passive. And sometimes playfulness is about flexibility and suspension from reality or external rules. So we know these characteristics of play. And this slide is very important now. This slide is mentioning that if you reflect back to the early years of your life as a child, you had to take some bitter medication or syrup that you didn't want to taste, but you had to. You had to. Then maybe your mom or dad kind of mixed it with some kind of chocolate before, chocolate after, candy before, candy after, to make it kind of sweetening for you. So it's a kind of sweetener of a medication. Just imagine that the sensory system or sensory stimulus, sensory avoidance, that the child might avoid some specific sensory system, sensory stimuli, but we as occupational therapists or caregiver are trying to work on the sensory system in a way that the child gradually learns how to face it, and we can use a sweetener. And that sweetener is that, just imagine it is sensory input. You can read it like that. It's dazzling, a kind of sensory input. Sensory input is the one that you don't have control over taking it or not taking it. It exists. Like a kind of loud voice tells like that. If you hear my voice like, hi everyone, wonderful. So if it is that loud and you might get annoyed, it's a sensory input. And even if you hear it like that, it is a sensory input, okay? But still, you don't have any control over the source of that stimulus. Maybe the light is too dazzling. Maybe there is lots of movement in the car that you might feel motion sickness and you throw up. Okay, there are all sensory inputs around you. Yeah? Sensory input times play, which is softer and listen the pink cloud. So sensory inputs times play equals sensory intake. That it is very important to keep thinking of this term. It's a kind of equation that I just made up of myself, but just to facilitate that, it's a kind of formula that can help you double think about the importance of play here. How you can change sensory inputs to sensory intake is most of the time is through play. In fact, play gives the meaning to sensory input and makes the child readier to accept that input and to make it his own. So he receives some sensory input without any control, then he mixes and matches with some other imagination or some story or something, and then he makes some fun idea out of that, then it becomes sensory intake. For example, just imagine that if a child does not like the loud sound, and Like say, okay, everyone, get ready, time to go. Okay, so once you say, okay, everyone, get ready, time to go, and the child is suffering from that loud noise, covering their ears, they're so ouch. Okay, on the other hand, just imagine that there is a game that we can play together, which is like that. Can you copy me? And then everyone together, they make the same thing, even though that sound used to be annoying to the child, but now that he is making a kind of intermittently making this, making it loud, making it loud, say, good job, good job, good job, good job. So it could be a play. It might make any no sense to you because you are a kind of adult that say, okay, it's not a play, but actually it was fun. Actually, there was a kind of expectation about how to switch between that loud or that low and loud thing, and the child want to make some excitement out of that. So accepting that loud voice in this play in fact, make the child readier to intake that loud voice. And then gradually the child have better experience of those loud voice, doesn't feel that vulnerable about that loud voice. And all about the central nervous system is that gradually learn from the past experience, gradually learn how to interpret the world, to feel he is at home, to feel he is comfortably at the territory. Once the child feels that he is secured in the territory, then he start exploration. Then he start moving outside and readier to learn, readier to learn, readier to learn. This one. Going to the next step, next step, next step for learning here, for behaving well, for daily living activities. So we cannot expect a child to have a good attention when still he is having big issues here. We cannot expect a child to have good auditory language skill if a child is struggling badly, immensely with here. So, and next slide is about the 5 hints that I want to talk about, and then it's the time that maybe at the end of this slide, it is your turn to run some 10 minutes activity together to jot down some sensory activities, and Mary will be in charge of making breakout room based on the number of attendees. So, number 1 hint, try your best to utilize these strategies or technique in making play. Okay? So, just be vigilant. You are gonna learn these techniques to put them and mix and match some techniques to make a few things which are now unfavorable to a child to make it favorable to a child with consensual play. Yeah. Okay. So number 1 is repetition is fun. Repetition is fun. Number 1 is repetition is fun. Number 2 is story and imagination help. Number 3 is best ideas come out from observation. Come out of observation. Number 4 is control is the key element. And number 5 is real changes happen through Kaizen process. So for each slide later on, I have topic. That slide, for the ones who are Persian, they know that storybook, it's a very, very common storybook that almost every Persian person has read. But the total story is about an old woman who wants to go and see her daughter, which is another side of a jungle. And the old man is afraid of being hunted by very
Old woman.
brutal animals in the jungle. So she decides to get into a big pumpkin and hide inside it and keep rolling over, rolling over, rolling over. And every time that a lion or a tiger or a panther or any animal stop the pumpkin, say, what is that pumpkin? Who is inside the rolling pumpkin? And the old woman would say that, okay, I'm just a rolling pumpkin. I'm just going forward. There is no one else inside. And then the lion gets cheated and then believes it and then let the pumpkins continue rolling over, rolling over, rolling over to the next animal again. Tiger knock on the pumpkin, say, is anybody there? The old woman say, no one else, I'm just a pumpkin rolling over, rolling over, rolling over. So it's a kind of repetition. That children love that story. Yes, even in English literature, I have seen Dr. Seuss, a very, very famous one for that. So making lots of rhymes in the words or kind of encouraging the child to understand about for example, Thomas sneezed and sneezed and sneezed. I love bugs, small bugs, big bugs, and very big bugs. So it's a kind of repetition in the story that child feels control and familiarity with that. So we can predict it. So repetition is important. Yes, fun. Next thing is about story and imagination hand. Like kind of, for example, there is a problem. So the river could be a metaphor of a problem. If you were about to move from one end of the river to the other side of the river, so that river is the representation of a problem. And then there are lots of stones that you can put on the river to cross the river peacefully to get to the other end. So having some kind of imaginary play or story in which the child does some activities to pass and unlock the stages to move forward to get to the other end of the river, to other side of the river, could be an example of story and imagination that
Oh,
might help.
shoot on that, Shidari.
Okay, so next thing is that observation that come out from, now best idea that come out from observation. So observation method. It is mostly a hint that is very feasible to get that when you are going to personalize some specific activity idea for a child, we should make sure that if we have ever paid attention to the way that specific child is playing or not. For example, one child shows tendency to jump and move and walk with heavier steps. Heavier steps, walking like an elephant. And then maybe the therapist decides to say, okay, I have an idea. Let's draw a picture. How come it's not fulfilling him at all? It's not adjusting the sensor in it. That child is saying by his movement, by the movement, that child is saying that I need proprioceptive stimulation. I need to move heavily, heavily, like an elephant. So that child is seeking proprioceptive stimulation from environment, and you are offering that child drawing picture at the table. In fact, you are suggesting the child put it aside, put those sensors aside and sit at the table. So if you have been a better observer of the child's play or movement or behavior, maybe your suggestion would be slightly different. For example, if you're about to ask the child to draw, still you can have it draw, but not at the table. There are two big papers attaching to two ends of the room wall, and then the child is supposed to jump in a bag like a kangaroo, getting into a big bag and like a kangaroo, jumping to one end, and then scribbling or drawing a little picture or sticking some sticker to the paper, and then jump, and sticking to some other sticker or drawing some picture at the other end of the wall, at the other end of the room. So it's a combination of the centering of the child and what you have previously planned as a kind of drawing task. Yes, for that child. Yeah, it's just an example about fun idea and how observation can help us. Number 4 is control is the key. Control is the key element, like kind of joystick or numbers. I truly remember the time that when I was a kid, one time I was very bored of some soccer match that was between Denmark and Italy. I'm not fully sure, but it was some of the World Cup. All my family members and relatives have sat in front of the TV. And actually, the match was very boring. So I decided to change my attitude about that. And I felt that, okay, I have a joystick in my hand. And based on what I was observing, I used my imaginary joystick to pass it to this, pass it to this, pass it up, shoot. And sometimes even the joystick worked because even there was a kind of coincidence between my passing and the player exactly passes it the way I was intending to. So I kept playing with the joystick, and sometimes it came through and gave good feeling of control over me that I could predict it. And sometimes else that it wasn't working, I would smash in the joystick that it's not working. And then again, joystick could pick them and I could work with that. Well, I can remember the times that I was very, very bored of a very, very devastating and tiring road trip. And my sister just told me that let's do a play. Let's stay awake and count the number of these white and red signals close to the road. They're just kind of traffic light and kind of white and strap with the red stripes. And then let's count them. They are little candies. They are called little candies. And if you see rounded blue, they are as if they could have a different name. And if there was some kind of let's say diamond shape traffic sign, which was yellow, has the maximum score, and it is called almond, for example. And then she asked me to keep counting them, and whenever the candies get as high as 100, I should notify my sister. Whenever I could gather 5 diamonds, I could notify my sister. And I easily remember that I was fully engaged with counting all the traffic signs of the road trip. And I can even remember that my sister has fallen into sleep, and I found the 5th diamond. I woke her after. I found the 5th traffic sign. So maybe at that time my sister got regret of suggestions that came to me, but it was a pleasurable experience for me and made it much more pleasurable. So control is the key element. So counting, numbers, timers, joystick, some meaningfulness in the activity or game, some novelty that the child has a vote in can help. And about Kaizen. Kaizen is a very important term, Japanese term, which is in the meaning of change toward goodness, change good, which is a kind of process that in many of the systems that are learning system, Kaizen methods work. But Kaizen has a very, very specific characteristic, which is about patience, gradual changes. Real changes happen through patience, through gradual optimism toward better outcome by learning from the past and adding up gradually the good points to the system. So it is called Kaizen method in general, okay? So based on that, what we should do is about the breakout room. I don't know how many of you are here now, but I think that for anyone that are here, maybe the group of 4 or 3 would be good, okay? But the scenarios are that for one group, group A, they are supposed to make 3 games, or based on the number of the attendees, okay? So 4 games, if there are a group of 4, 4 games. 3 or 4 games or play for a child who doesn't want to play with water, is reluctant to touch water, is very hesitant to go to the swimming pool, and is crying and feels panicked. Okay? The other group should think of the child who can't stop and keeps moving in the room, and your plan is to helping the child gradually learn bowling. Okay? So how many groups we can make? 2 groups. So we can have 4 activity ideas toward any of these 2 tasks, okay? So I will switch in between each group, and then thank you very much. Can we stop the recording here? And thank you. So I think that the recording is not needed.